Thanks so much for joining us here on 9 News Plus. I'm Chris Bianchi. On Friday, August the 11th, Attorney General Merrick Garland announced that David Weiss is now appointed as the special counsel to look into a series of investigations into the president's son, Hunter Biden.
I'm here today to announce the appointment of David Weiss as a special counsel, consistent with the Department of Justice regulations governing such matters. In keeping with those regulations, I have today notified the designated members of each House of Congress of the appointment.
Probably heard a lot about this, but Hunter Biden is accused of leveraging his family's name to get cushy jobs with foreign businesses, also not paying taxes, a gun charge, drug use, and joining us with more about this significant development about the appointing of the special counsel, 9 News legal expert Whitney Traylor. First of all, Whitney, can you start by reminding us, before we kind of get into anything else, before we get into the investigations, just remind us exactly what a special counsel is and what it does?
Sure. So the special counsel can have a number of roles, but it's generally appointed by the Attorney General, and the special counsel has powers to investigate. They're not necessarily bound by some of the same, I guess, restrictions in the DOJ. And it's interesting in this case because David Weiss, he is with the Attorney General's office. He was an Attorney General in Delaware that was actually appointed by President Trump. He remained on, even though normally when one administration goes out, all the attorney generals go out as well. And so the Biden administration maintained David Weiss. He's a Republican attorney general for purposes of the Hunter Biden investigation, which is what he was originally doing way back in starting I think in 2018 or maybe 2019. And so he's remained on. Interestingly though, as the investigation went on, and I'm sure we'll get into it, he just recently asked Merrick Garland on Tuesday to be appointed as special counsel so he would have more powers. And specifically, what he's allowed to do is he's allowed to bring federal charges in any federal jurisdiction as a result of what he finds during the investigation. So he's not bound to just what's being investigated. So during the investigation, if other things come up as special counsel, you can prosecute those. You're not under the DOJ, and you have sort of more freedom and flexibility in that regard. So this one's a little bit different because it's the same assistant attorney general, who's now going to be appointed special counsel. A lot of times, if you think about Robert Mueller or some of these others, they were outside attorneys that were appointed to be special counsel. This one, David Weiss, was the attorney general. Now he's acting in the special counsel capacity.
So it's the same guy who basically has more powers and more freedom to look into some of these charges against Hunter Biden. So what does this mean from a broad perspective about the investigation into Hunter Biden? What else perhaps have we learned?
Well, so we haven't learned much because he was just appointed actually today, I guess. He made the request on Tuesday. But what we do know is that part of the reason that he made this request and that I think it was granted was because the plea deal that he had coordinated with Hunter Biden that they had agreed to, they presented it to a judge in Delaware. That judge rejected it. And in July, and said there's a series of reasons why we don't want this. They had a hearing in July where she gave them a briefing schedule in which both sides could respond to her concerns. And it was at that point, subsequent to that July 28th hearing, that David Weiss came forward and said, look, we need to be appointed as special counsel. We're not going to reach a deal. And that's where things are now. And I'm sure we'll get into it more, but that's the overview.
Okay, so let's begin into the charges that are being levied here against Hunter Biden. Again, president's son, his lone living son. He's accused of leveraging his family's name to gain quite a bit of money. He made hundreds of thousands, in fact, over $1 million, I believe, in 2013, 2014, getting appointed to these kind of cushy foreign boards, including a Ukrainian company and a Chinese company. And then he didn't pay taxes for a couple of years, but those have been repaid. Drug use and lying about it and obtaining a gun that he had for 11 days as well. How serious are these charges, and what else might require investigation at this point?
Well, it's a good question. So the actual charges that stemmed, they were essentially three charges. The 2017 and 2018, he's accused of not paying his taxes, which was a little bit over 100 grand each year. He ultimately did pay those, but he was charged with those two. Those are misdemeanors, actually. They have up to 12 months per charge for a sentence. So he was charged with those misdemeanors. And the other, and this was after an investigation, there was a grand jury put forward starting in 2019. The grand jury has been investigating this, and that's what their original charge was to investigate some of the business dealings, as you mentioned in your lead-in, but it turns out what they ultimately came up with was these tax charges, and so those are misdemeanors. And then there was also a felony gun charge related to a 2018 when he applied for his weapon, his firearm, and he received it. He lied on the application and said he wasn't addicted to drugs at the time, which he was. He possessed the gun for about 11 days. So those were the three charges after the investigation by the grand jury from 2019 until essentially 2022. They came up with those three charges. David Weiss, who led that investigation as the Attorney General, and the Hunter Biden's attorneys, they all came up with this plea deal. And the plea deal was that he would be on probation for 2 years because he had paid the taxes back. And there was a pretrial diversion agreement on the gun charge, which meant he wouldn't face any felony charges, because that gun charge is actually a felony that could face up to 10 years in prison. Now, the gun charges, I've looked at it, the Attorney General, it's unusual for them to prosecute that specific crime. So that plea deal wasn't necessarily surprising, but what they came up with was that plea deal, and they presented it to a judge in Delaware. The judge then rejected it, and she listed a series of concerns. One of the main concerns was the broad immunity that Hunter Biden would have. So the judge said, I want you to address these concerns in writing. She gave both sides a month to do so. While they were responding to the judge's request or the judge's concerns about the plea deal, David Weiss said, look, I don't think we're going to be able to reach a deal based on what you've put forward, the judge, and said, I think it's futile. We need to go forward in preparation for trial. So that was he just made that argument this week. The judge gave the Biden team until Monday to respond to that. So their responses can only be a number of things. One is, hey, let us keep negotiating. Two is, we agree, we're at an impasse, let's go to trial. Or maybe some other argument to try and delay things. But essentially what I believe now is going to happen is that the plea deal was rejected. David Weiss is now saying, I don't think we're going to be able to reach something, so let's move forward with trial. But as it stands now, the only charges are the failure to pay taxes in 2017 and 2018 and lying on the gun application. But now that David Weiss is special counsel, the investigation, he can go into a lot of other areas. But some people are saying, look, you've been investigating this since 2019. They've combed over the financial documents. President Biden has submitted 25 years of tax returns. You haven't come up with anything. Now, the counter argument, and a lot of Republicans are beating on the table saying, well, the judge rejected the plea deal. It was a sweetheart deal. It was too soft. It wasn't appropriate. That should tell you what you need to know right there. So now David Weiss, as special counsel, will be going forward. We'll see what the Biden team puts forward on Monday in their briefing to the judge. But it looks like he's going to continue to investigate, and there may be more charges. We just don't know what yet.
Do you agree with some of that Republican criticism, because there is the, I suppose, argument that it was a sweetheart deal because the federal judge did reject it? How common is that, and
should
the Republicans be upset about it.
Right. It's not uncommon that a judge will reject a plea deal. That happens. That's a normal part. It's not customary. Usually, a judge will accept what the DA puts forward. But what you have to remember, and I think it's really important, is that David Weiss was appointed by President Trump specifically for this task, remained on, and I think the Biden administration did the right thing by saying, we're going to allow this Trump appointee to continue the investigation. The grand jury investigated for 4 years, 3 to 4 years, and they didn't come up with anything. This was what they came up with. So I think the Republicans' argument is a legit, it's a reasonable argument. It's a logical deduction. Hey, you were too soft. The judge saw through that and said no. But I think the judge's primary concern was the broad immunity that would be given to him. So, but they couldn't come to a deal. After the judge said that, the Biden team and the DOJ couldn't come to a deal. So now Republicans, I was just listening to Sean Hannity on my way in, and they're still fired up that David Weiss is still now going to be the special counsel, which I'm surprised at, because he will have greater authority and more autonomy as a special counsel. He was a Trump appointee. He requested to be special counsel, which to me implies that there's other areas that he may want to get into, or he may want to broaden out his investigation. So the Republicans have a reasonable argument, but at the same time, I think there's counterpoints to their arguments as well. And some, of course, Jim Jordan and Comer, they've been very adamant that this whole thing's been a mess. There was the IRS whistleblower who came forward and said, look, they've been slow walking this, they've been giving him preferential treatment. So there is indication that this hasn't been as an aggressive or robust prosecution as it could have been.
Yeah. Well, one counter argument to this, though, is you mentioned James Comer, the Republican from Kentucky. He's the head of the Oversight Committee, and they've been looking into Hunter Biden's dealings ever since they took control at the start of the calendar year. So they've had several months to look into and have access to Hunter Biden's conduct, as well as the potential ties to Joe Biden, correct?
That's exactly right. But the House Oversight Committee is saying, look, we're not able to do our investigation as thoroughly as we want. We can't do some of the things we want while this investigation is going on. So they're saying, hey, we're sort of being pushed back while the criminal investigation is going on, and the criminal investigation is not as aggressive as we'd like. So
gotcha.
And
makes sense.
Yeah, and this is there's political arguments and there are legal arguments, but there's such a fine line between the two. But at the same time, the House Oversight Committee, the question is, okay, well, what evidence do they have? And again, you look at, I think President Biden's been fairly transparent. Not when you compare him to President Trump, very transparent in that he submitted 25 years of tax returns. And with all the talk about Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings, particularly being on the board of Burisma, the Ukraine energy company, they haven't been able to connect the dots, if they're there, to show some improper handling or influence on, and really the bigger issue is the potential influence on policy, on what President Biden did, or even when he was vice president. Did this impact our policy or decisions that were made in that governmental capacity? And that's where nobody's come up with anything. Now, Special Counsel Weiss maybe there will be other charges or more evidence, but this investigation, we're going on 5 years now.
Certainly been a while. I suppose I want to kind of end things by looking forward a little bit. So what happens now, and what do you expect to happen as we head over the next few months with this?
Well, I would be surprised if there's a plea deal at this point. I would expect that the investigation would continue. According to the special counsel rules, at the conclusion of his investigation, now as special counsel, he has to submit a report. Merrick Garland went on, I just watched one of his press conferences, and he said, I will make the report public to the extent it's consistent with the rules and certain policies. It doesn't infringe on certain privacy rights. So I suspect he will make it public with probably some redactions. So that will be very telling what comes out of the special counsel report. So I don't know what the timeline is on that. I suspect it will move fairly quickly. He's been involved in this again since, for almost 5 years. So how much more? And there's been hundreds of witnesses. The grand jury's looked at a lot of evidence. So I don't know what else he expects to look into. But as special counsel, if during the investigation something comes up that wasn't part of the investigation, he can then go down that road as well. So I think there will be more information that comes out. And if they can connect it to one, Joe Biden having knowledge of some impropriety, and then secondarily it influencing policy in some way, then President Biden is looking at that's going to be very difficult for him to deal with.
And of course, it would likely overlap with the 2024 election and the run-up to it. So,
yes.
Very interesting. I'm sure we'll check back in with you in the coming months, maybe even coming years about this, but very interesting, no doubt about it. But 9 News legal expert Woody Triller, thanks so much for your time here today.
Sure, good to be here.